Well, Dave and I are here today to talk about Patreon. And so I'll start. We've been engaged in a lengthy series of email exchanges with all of the people in our network, and no one is happy at all with what's been happening. And so we've been determining what our options are. And we looked at Subscribestar, but it looks like PayPal decided to cut funding out from them. And so it doesn't look like moving to an alternative provider, an alternative commercial provider that's out of our bailiwick, out of our control, is going to be viable. So Dave, why don't you describe what we talked about today?
Yeah, well, first, I think we should just make it very clear for everybody how significant what happened to Carl Benjamin Sargon of Akkad is. It doesn't matter what you think of him or whether you agree with him or any of that stuff. The banning of him for doing something that was not on the Patreon platform, that wasn't even done on his channel, because of a word he said where he was using the word against the alt-right or the neo-Nazis or whatever you want to call them, is a massive move of that line of what's acceptable. Now, there's all sorts of debates we can have, and we've had them, of what lines should be, if there should be lines at all. But the fact that this guy got booted with no chance of recourse, with no warning, just like that, it's just an extension of everything else that we've all been talking about.
Also, given that it's also the case that he didn't break Patreon's rules of engagement, the ones that they stated, and that Conte had talked to you about the fact that that wasn't going to happen, and that Patreon hasn't responded well to this.
Well, look, Jack Conte came into my studio in my home and said, he said a phrase that I had never heard before, maybe you had heard it before, manifest observable behavior. So you had never even heard that phrase before, right? I thought maybe this was just something that went past me. Okay, now of course, manifest observable behavior, M-O-B, mob. You can't make that up. I mean, there's a real there's a real beauty there. But so the point was that it had to be about behavior, and then in their terms of service, it also had to be about what was happening on platform. So at every firewall here of what would have been acceptable, Patreon failed, and they've put us in a position where, look, I called you last Saturday, and when this was really catching fire, and I said, you know, Patreon is about 65 to 70% of my rev. I have a company now with employees, you know, full-timers, part-timers. I was actually considering deleting it right then and there, which no one in their right mind would do, no business person would do. And I've taken big risks in the past. You know, before I was on Patreon, we were at Aura TV. Me and my producer and my director, we all quit our jobs, lost our health insurance, all of it, to join Patreon. So I like taking risks, but then I realized, all right, we have to figure out a plan, and that's exactly why we're doing this right now.
Yeah. Well, and we would have moved faster, but well, and I did set up a Subscribestar account, although I never quite finished setting it up, partly because Subscribestar seemed to fall apart almost immediately under attack. And also, it wasn't obvious that, I also read their terms of agreement, and it wasn't obvious that we weren't going to be just in exactly the same situation again. And there's only so many mistakes you can make before the mistakes start to become fatal. So we actually wanted to come up with a serious and stable solution. And I've been working on for months, literally for months. It's been 6 months. I've been working on a system to allow authors and other people who engage publicly on intellectual issues to interact more effectively with their readers and viewers and listeners. And it occurred to me this week that with a bit of modification, that could serve exactly the function that we're hoping it would serve. So what we're going to try to do as fast as we possibly can is to set this system up on a subscriber model that's analogous to Patreon. It'll have a bunch of additional features, which I don't want to talk about right now, and I don't want to overpromise, but the system is because the system is new. But we're going to try to get that rolled out as fast as we possibly can. So, and we have a number of people who are hypothetically interested in moving their subscription service over to it. Dave and I are very seriously planning to do this as soon as we can do it in an intelligent way. And so,
and you know, by the way, one of the interesting things here, we haven't talked about this, but I'm guessing your experience is just like mine. The amount of emails that I have received, and of course tweets and everything else, but mostly emails from developers, from investors, from regular people, from engineers. I mean, just anyone going, this is the one. Because, you know, the issue with all of these free speech things is, it's like you don't want to swing too early. before you realize that the problem's gotten to critical mass. But then most likely you're going to swing too late. The lines will have moved so far that we may be on the outside of them. And that's why this one, I think, was so interesting, because Carl, you know, years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, when I started waking up to what was going on with the left, obviously, and all of the free speech stuff, everyone said, you've got to talk to Sargon of Akkad. He's the guy that's been, so this is the guy that's been ahead of all of this.
Sargon too was like, he was very helpful to me when I was first under attack, you know, and he's a brave guy. And it's a real mistake what Patreon has done to him. And as I said, everybody in our network is extremely upset about it. Like, we've been sending emails back and forth, well, probably with 30 or 40 people. And so, as Dave said earlier, we wanted to make this video today to let everybody that we're communicating with know that we have not been sleeping on this front, man. People are trying to figure out what to do so this stops happening. And we have a good plan, and we're going to try to implement it as soon as possible. So if I would ask everybody who's listening to be, you know, reasonably patient. Imagine that this will take somewhere between a week and a month to sort out properly. We're going to try to get something up in the next week, hopefully before Christmas, if we can't manage that, you know, because when you implement something like this, there are technical complications that might emerge that you don't foresee. But I don't want people to get the impression that we're taking this lightly or lying down, and that we're not looking for a permanent alternative, because we are. And I think we can come up with a better alternative. And so that's the plan.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would say. I would just add that it was like we were waiting for a moment. You know, we've watched these doors slowly closing on us, all of us, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Facebook, who's getting banned, who's getting shadow banned, payment processing, everything else. And we are taking this as seriously as possible. Of course, you know, Jordan, who's working harder than anyone on the face of the planet, somehow you managed to also partly build a platform over the course of the past year in the middle of all of that.
We knew that this was lurking in the background, and that this was going to be a problem. And Dave, you've spent lots of time talking to investors and developers about building alternatives to these platforms that seem to be willing to throw their weight around in an increasingly arbitrary manner. But it's not like it's a simple thing to do.
People want somebody to say enough is enough. And I mentioned this in a live stream I did the other day, but, you know, I've watched my Patreon drop. We've lost around 600 patrons, I think about $5,000 a month. But in a weird way, I've actually been inspired by it, because I'm watching people stand up for themselves. So it's like, on one hand, people are emailing me and they're saying, I'm dropping my patronage and I'm really pissed, and it's not about you, and I want to support you. And on the other hand, my business side is going, that's not great. But we will solve this thing. I have
feel
nothing
the same way. I've lost 1,000 subscribers, and I feel exactly the same way. It's like, well, they're telling Patreon to go to hell, and you know, it's not so good for me on the financial front, although that's not too big a catastrophe at the moment. They're taking the right stand and encouraging us, let's say, or encouraging someone to do something about this. So anyways, that's
I like what you said. If we can just ask you guys to be reasonably patient. We're talking to everybody that you can think of, and some people that you can't think of. We're going to fix this. We're going to fix it.
Yeah, well, or at least we're going to do our best to fix it. There's going to be some bumps along the way, man, because we have to speed this process up too. So we'll have to consider this a beta version. But at minimum, we hope to provide an easy way of switching to a new subscription service within the next very short while. And thank you everyone for your continued patience and your continued support and your attention and your thoughts and your reaction to all of this. And it's very much appreciated, and it does help us, I would say, maintain motivation to continue doing this constantly. You know, the fact that I have all these Patreon subscribers certainly is one of the reasons that I try to put my YouTube channel, I wouldn't say first and foremost, because it's had to take a backseat to this lecture tour, but man, it's way the hell up there on my priority list.
Over the weekend, Patreon, which is a major service that is designed to allow people to basically have people give them money for a particular service. You know, we have a subscription service over at the Daily Wire, but there are lots of people who offer special services to their customers via Patreon. Well, social media company Patreon decided they were going to ban a series of people. Now, I'm not a fan of some of these people, right? So these people include Milo Yiannopoulos, who I think is a terrible human being, and James Alsop, who is they call him a far-right political commentator. He's really just an alt-right guy. He was banned from Patreon as well. Patreon also banned Carl Benjamin, known as Sargon of Akkad, who is not like Milo and not like James Alsop. The bottom line is they shouldn't be banning any of these people. If you don't like these people, then maybe you should just explain why they're wrong and tell people not to give them money for their services. But Patreon has now banned them without any clear standard of why the ban happened in the first place. This comes after Alex Jones was banned from Twitter forever, after Apple and Spotify removed his podcast. Again, I don't have to agree with any of these people to recognize that social media has no standards, and they are unevenly applying those standards as much as they could possibly want. Because listen, there will come a point where Patreon bans me. I'm not on Patreon, but if I were, they would ban me. Where Patreon or Facebook or Twitter come after me, where they come after Jordan Peterson, where they come after Dave Rubin, where they come after Mark Levin, where they come after Sean Hannity, where they come after everyone who they disagree with on any level. That's the way these social media companies are working. Because this is what Silicon Valley is in the end. It's a bunch of self-aggrandizing, radical leftist jerks who spend their days pretending to like meditation so they can virtue signal to all their friends while banning people who disagree with them politically. That's what Silicon Valley has become. And we're supposed to take these people seriously as our moral arbiters, but that's exactly what they do. They are our moral arbiters now because they can mobilize the mob or they can be mobilized by the mob to go after people on a regular basis. It's astonishing.
Now, Carl Benjamin joins me. He's a British YouTuber, better known by the online alias Sargon of Akkad, appears to have been deplatformed by yet another online platform known as Patreon, which is a fundraising platform online. Without warning, Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad, has become demonetized, yet YouTube still remains. And it got me thinking about the nature of these tech companies and the increasingly opaque way in which their decisions are being made as to who stays on the platforms and who doesn't. Carl, thank you for joining me. Speak to me.
Oh, hi, Maajid. How are you?
I'm all right. What's gone on? Why have you been kicked off Patreon?
Honestly, I mean, to jump to the chase, it's political deplatforming. I'm an opponent of political correctness. Patreon is a Silicon Valley tech giant, and they are pro-political correctness. And this has been probably coming for quite some time. So I've used their platform for years now with absolutely no problems, because the rules of the platform are obviously things that happen on the platform must be polite and moderated and quite middle class, frankly. And I've been told that something I've said off the platform was naughty, and for this crime against political correctness, despite the fact of not being against their own terms of service, I have been deplatformed.
So let's get to that, Carl, because some of the stuff that, I mean, there's been this, now having met you before, I was surprised at what's being alleged. And they're alleged, and because when I met you, I didn't sense this, right? But it's being alleged by some people out there that you've said racist things and things mocking, for example, rape. Can you explain that? Can you kind of give your perspective on that? And is there a context to that, or you just accept that some of the things you said in the past were just a bit perhaps ill-considered?
Well, I've never mocked rape, obviously, and I've never abused anyone, obviously. But I suppose a lot of what I do online is in the atmosphere of a comedy club.
Yep.
And I think it's understood like that with my audience. And so when you take that into a more formal setting, then obviously it does tend to lose the context and atmosphere in which it was said. So you can say that these things were offensive, and yes, a lot of the things I do say sometimes are offensive, but they're deliberately so to make a point, to prove something about the inherent contradiction of political correctness and what it's doing, frankly, to our country. So, I mean, possibly guilty, but probably not.
Well, okay. What about because the Times ran this article about Jess Phillips MP and something you said on, I think, Twitter. Are you still on Twitter, by the way?
No, I'm not on Twitter, no.
Oh, there's by the way, just to let you know, there's a chap using the Sargon of Akkad name that has 12.5 thousand followers. That's not you.
No, that's not me. There are lots of people impersonating me. Sorry, I'm in the street at the moment, and I'm trying to find more quiet places.
Oh, no, that's okay. I can hear you. So speak to me about the allegation that the Times made about Jess Phillips MP and what you said regarding her rape.
Oh, was it? Well, I didn't say anything regarding her rape. So this was in 2016 when she was trying to attempt the Reclaim the Internet campaign. Now, Jess Phillips is a feminist, a notorious feminist activist, an MP, and she has a network of feminists who were trying to gain control of social media and what could and could not be said on there. I don't believe that they should be the arbiters of what can and can't be said on social media, because I don't think they can be trusted with their own rules, very much in the same way as Patreon, in fact. And so I tweeted at Jess, and it was a rude tweet, don't get me wrong, it was the purpose to be rude, but the point was you couldn't misconstrue it as a threat. As rude as it was, there's certainly no interpretation of what I said that could be construed as a threat. And I did this deliberately to prove the point that the media would report it as being a threat anyway, which they did. Because, again, this is not about what's actually happened. This is about enforcing a new kind of regime. And I don't like that.
So what about tech companies they're private companies, right? So do you see this as a free speech issue? If they decide for political reasons that they don't like your views and they say you can't any longer use our platform, is that a free speech issue, or is that a private company has the right to decide who uses their service issue?
Well, I mean, this is the eternal question that we've come to with the internet. Where do we draw the lines and who gets to decide? Because I don't think anyone would say that government doesn't have a role in regulating tech companies and the internet, but I don't think anyone would also, on the other side, say we shouldn't have any kind of restrictions or anything like that. So really it's down to the negotiation that we have. But my concern is I'm very centrist politically, and now they've come for centrists who are just willing to be politically incorrect from time to time. And, I mean, we knew that it's hard to make an argument to not deplatform the alt-right unless you're I guess a free speech extremist like I am, but that changes when you get to like an Alex Jones, who is deplatformed from multiple platforms in one day, and he's not someone who's a racist. He was a libertarian conspiracy theorist, and now it's come to a centrist liberal like myself.
Yeah, I'm worried, Carl, about the echo chamber, and I'm worried, as you know, about how we're only listening to people we agree with these days, and that's where my interest in this conversation arises, and why my alarm bells start ringing when tech companies seem to be deplatforming increasingly vocal voices that don't necessarily conform to their liberal perspective on things. For me, that's worrying because of the echo chamber phenomenon. But
you also are on Patreon, and this happens to be the topic that everyone's talking about at the moment. I want to just talk a little bit about censorship and platforming and deplatforming and the rest of it. Do you want to lay out quickly what happened to Sargon, or do you want me to do it?
You go ahead and do it.
So just very briefly, for people that don't know, Sargon of Akkad, who's a popular YouTuber, he was one of the first sort of from the classical liberal space when I was kind of waking up to what was going on with the left related to free speech and sort of the SJW hysteria. Everyone said, you got to talk to Sargon of Akkad. I didn't even know if it was a real person or who the hell this guy was. He was booted off Patreon a couple days ago with no recourse, with no warning, because 10 months ago in February, on another channel,
that's right,
not his own channel,
that's right,
very tiny YouTube channel with 4,000 subscribers, on an audio interview show with a non-English native speaker, which I only mentioned because the conversation was a little stilted because of the language, he said the N-word. And he said it not to be racially pejorative, but he said it because he was sort of using the language of the alt-right against themselves.
Exactly.
Patreon heard him say this, they don't think about or look into context, and they boot him. And this is actually a pretty big thing in our space. I usually don't like talking this much at the beginning of a show, and now I hand it to you. What do you make of what's going on with platforming, deplatforming? We are both on Patreon, etc.
Well, I'll just say that, I was heavily hit, but my pie of the big Patreon, my slice of the pie is very small. I had maybe 600 patrons, and I think I checked last maybe a day and a half ago, and I had lost more than 100 out of 600.
No, so that's a lot.
So that's a lot. It's not a lot of money that I'm making on the platform, but it still hurts. I really think that it stems from, and I think it might be one of the things that you had on the list for us to talk about. Oftentimes people pit these binaries against one another. You're either a thinking person or a emotive person. Mm-hmm. You're either, it's either rational or emotional.
This is one of the things that you're writing about.
I'm writing about this in the book, right? Because I want to explain this very quick trigger of outrage that arises in many contexts, in universities, in companies, and when they deplatform people. So I think people use these fast and frugal heuristics. Oftentimes these heuristics work well, but on other cases where you misapply an emotional reaction in a context where it would require a bit more cognitive effort, this is where you get some of these problems. So
can you give me an example first? When does a heuristic that just is like the immediate reaction heuristic work?
If I'm walking down, taking a shortcut to go home, and I see 3 young men that look quite suspicious, my heart starts racing, I start maybe sweating a bit, my blood pressure goes up, so I'm getting an emotional reaction that's physiological based, precisely because it makes sense at that moment for this autonomic reaction to take place. If I'm trying to solve a calculus problem, then calling all of my emotional system into action might not be the right thing. So the argument is that it's not that we are either rational or emotional being, it's that you should trigger, forgive the term, you should activate the correct system at the appropriate time. And I think what happens with a lot of these social justice warrior types is that they're very much driven by the emotional system in the wrong context, and that's where you get the kinds of situations like with Sargon.
Yeah, so to live life as a functioning human, you need a little push and pull on that, right?
Right, exactly.
You need the emotive stuff, and then you need the cognitive stuff. Why do you think this is happening at these platforms? Why do you think they are bowing? I mean, they're really just bowing to the mob every time. And the reason I'm so concerned about it is not only just because of how I feel about free speech, but we're watching, I mean, we're just in slow motion watching those lines. They're coming both ways, but mostly it's coming, let's say, from the SJW left, so I'll use this hand. It's moving really fast this way, where it's going to be that everybody is going to be on the outs. Because if a guy like Sargon, who as far as I can tell is just an old school liberal, and you know he's
I've been on a show twice, and he never said anything that struck me as unreasonable. He seems like a very reasonable, fair guy.
Yeah, and look, he's a bit of a troll. He's a bit of a provocateur. All of those things. But the point is that if a guy like Carl Benjamin, that's his real name, if he can't be on a platform, then half the people that we know, and maybe that includes us, can't be on these platforms. So what do you think is happening at the high levels of that? Of what's
I mean, it's a combination of many things. I think one of the things is that I call it in my Canadian Senate in 2017 when I went to talk about the Bill C-16.
Lovely bow tie, by the way.
Thank you very much.
That was very nice.
Thank you for remembering. I talked about the "I'm a victim, therefore I am" ethos, right? It used to be I think, therefore I am. Now it's I'm a victim. So to stay true to a victimology ethos, you have to be outraged, you have to be indignant, you have to self-flagellate at the altar of progressivism. And people are cognitive misers. In other words, they're cognitively lazy. And now I've got this autonomic system where I can draw on my emotional indignation to navigate through the world. Well, for the social justice warrior types, it's easy to fall prey to the hyperactivation of the emotional system, right? As you said, it's not that we are this or that. And I think I emailed you yesterday, one of the concepts that I'm developing in my book is this idea of what I call epistemological dichotomania, seeing the world as sort of opposing binaries. We are rational and we are emotional. There are very clear evolutionary reasons why we've evolved the capacity to think, but also very clear evolutionary reasons why anger and envy and schadenfreude and compassion have also evolved. So we're both. Just trigger the right system at the right time.
So do you think part of it is just that the speed of the internet, the fact that you can be on Twitter so quickly releasing this stuff, that you can learn more faster now, right? You can listen to podcasts in double speed, and that you can take in so much information and shoot out so much information that maybe is triggering, your word, some of the
hyperactive emotional stuff.
Yeah, I mean, as opposed to using a more rational, logical.
Although you're not succumbing to that, right? So
I don't know what's wrong with me.
So it is really an interaction, perhaps, of the environment that you're describing, but it has to be the right personality who succumbs to that hyperactive emotional system. You're not succumbing to it. I'm not succumbing to it. And so I'd like for people to develop, I don't know if it's the right term or a good term, but mental hygiene, right? In the same way that we develop personal hygiene. I mean, stop for a minute, think about it. What's the context under which Sargon, uttered that particular word? And now that there is so much information that suggests that there was a context, why can't you reverse it? Why can't you set it correctly? Well, it's because it's very difficult for people to admit, mea culpa, I was wrong. And so then they anchor in their position and nothing's going to move them from it. It's very bad business.
So I woke up the other morning to thousands of messages from all my various friends and subscribers and whoever else on the internet. And I thought, oh, blimey, that's odd. And they were all talking about my Patreon. So I went to check it, and lo and behold, my Patreon wasn't there. I thought it was quite strange. I've been on Patreon for, 3 or 4 years now, and I've never had a problem. And so I thought, well, I'd better email Jack Conte, the CEO of Patreon, because clearly there has been some kind of mistake. I said, "Hi Jack, sorry to bother you, but I woke up today to find my Patreon account had been removed. I have not been provided with a reason why, and naturally I assume this is some kind of mistake, as I don't believe I have ever exhibited any manifest observable behaviour that would warrant this. Would you be able to help me out, please? Thanks in advance, and Merry Christmas, Carl Benjamin. Now you might be thinking, manifest observable behaviour, that's an odd phrase, but I've heard it before. Where have I heard it? And the place I heard it was when Jack Conte was justifying deplatforming Lauren Southern, despite the fact she had otherwise not violated their terms of service.
Patreon recently took down the pages of all the members of Defend Europe, including Lauren Southern's page, and we also took down the IGD news page as well. Some people are really upset about this. Some people have even accused Patreon of making decisions based on political ideology, so I'd like to clear all that up right now. Content policy and the decision to remove a creator page has absolutely nothing to do with politics and ideology, and has everything to do with a concept called manifest observable behavior. The purpose of using manifest observable behavior is to remove personal values and beliefs when the team is reviewing content. It's a review method that's entirely based on observable facts. What has a camera seen? What has an audio device recorded? It doesn't matter what your intentions are, your motivations, who you are, your identity, your ideology. The trust and safety team only looks at manifest observable behavior. We get rigorous and specific because we're talking about removing a person's income. The authority to take away a human being's income is a sobering responsibility.
So naturally, I thought to myself, blimey, what have I done? I don't think I've done anything particularly exciting. The only thing that has really happened to me is when I was attacked by Antifa, and that was quite some time ago, and everything I did was in self-defense, and I didn't even punch anyone. So I couldn't see what I'd done to get myself deplatformed from Patreon. Jack never replied to my email, but I was sent this by many of my patrons, where Patreon had replied to them when they asked what had happened to my Patreon account. Hi there, thank you for reaching out. This page was removed by a trust and safety team for violating our community guidelines. At Patreon, we believe in freedom of speech, and we are creating a platform that empowers creators to share and debate ideas. The creator in question used racial and homophobic slurs as insults in a conversation shared online. As a result, that page has been removed from Patreon. Naturally, I, a crusader against political correctness, thought, of course, but you're gonna have to be a little bit more specific than that. But I mean, it probably is true. I probably have used the naughty words. Luckily for me, I received an email from Patreon a few hours later. Hello, Carl. My name is Sydney, and I'm on the Trust and Safety team here at Patreon. I want you to know that my team and I removed your creator page for violating our community guidelines around hate speech. Patreon doesn't allow creators to use racial slurs as insults. In a conversation posted on Michelle Caitlin's YouTube channel, you use language that we consider harmful and degrading. For this reason, your Patreon creator page has been removed. And I thought to myself, that's really interesting, because the conversation they're talking about happened 10 months ago, at the height of a full-on harassment campaign that was going on against me by, I guess, people we would broadly call alt-right trolls, who are organising themselves on anonymous message boards. I actually had to report this to the police because it got so bad. I didn't really want to publicise it, because every time I talk about it, it just gets them more excited. But thank you, Patreon, for forcing me to explain to everyone exactly what's going on here. Here's the clip in question they're referring to from the live stream, and I think that the context in which I use it is self-explanatory enough. This is what I mean about the chat. I just can't be bothered to deal with people who treat me like this. It's really annoying. Like, you are acting like a bunch of niggas, just so you know. You act like white niggas. Exactly how you describe black people acting is the impression I get dealing with the alt-right. Now you might say, well, that's very rude, and of course you'd be right, because that was precisely the point. I was trying to use their own language against them, and do what I can to hurt them, because they were doing what they could to make my life an absolute misery.